Renowned author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is visiting Nigeria as part of her international book tour for her latest novel, Dream Count. In Lagos, fans turned out in large numbers to meet the celebrated writer of Half of a Yellow Sun and Americana. While her tour has drawn large audiences, Adichie expressed equal passion for connecting with her Nigerian readers. We'll hear from Adichie shortly, but first, DW's Olisa Chukwuma traveled back home with her to the author's birthplace in Enugu State.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is no stranger to adoring fans. This time in Enugu in southeast Nigeria at the Things Fall Apart Festival, honoring the legacy of Chinua Achebe, widely regarded as the father of modern African literature.
I'm here in this beautiful city of my field. I am here in the city of my birth.
Chimamanda's public presence in Nigeria marks a homecoming tour promoting her latest novel, Dream Count. It's her first in more than 10 years.
For many here, eager to get her autograph on a copy of the new book, it's been a long wait. For others, it wasn't just about the autograph, but a rare chance to finally meet the author whose work has captured their imagination.
Meeting her in person was just very ethereal for me, like it was out of this world for me. And she gave me a hug, and then she drew a love sign on my book, so I'm just like, thank you. Yeah, so it was nice meeting her.
She's my favorite author, actually, and I really like her work. So to get her autograph on a copy of her book and to see her in person was a lot to me.
Part of her homecoming took her back to her secondary school in Nsukka, a town that influenced her first novel, Purple Hibiscus. There, she was hosted by the school officials and got to meet some of the excited students.
It's really nice to have her around us because we have heard her stories and that she was part of us and one of us and has become somebody internationally. So it's really great to have her in our midst. It's like a dream for some of us that are here.
I read one of her books, Half of a Yellow Sun. It was really nice, and meeting her was, I feel blessed. I am very, very lucky because many people would have loved to meet her as well. So I feel very, very blessed.
For the students here, Chimamanda's visit serves as a reminder that they too can achieve success and that the next generation's dreams count. All right, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, thank you for speaking with DW.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's good to have you today. And your newest book, Dream Count, you're on your book tour in Nigeria. So much has been said about it. But one thing that popped up, which caught a lot of people by surprise, was the talk about even a writer's block. So I'd like to ask, what have you learned from that, process? Did it change anything about your process, about what you say about writing, and what advice would you give, or how would that help maybe other creatives or writers in their moments of challenge?
Did it teach me something? Yes. It forces a kind of humility on you because it makes you realize you do not have control over this gift that you have. And so and I think it also forces a kind of gratitude. It increases your sense of gratitude when it ends. But really, it's. But I also think that when you're any kind of creative person, not just a writer, you will have creative dry spells. I think it comes with the territory of creating. And if there's anything I would say to people who experience it is very hard. But you also have to try and do things that will maybe make it not last too long. So what I did was I read the books I loved, books I'd read before, books I know that give me pleasure, enlighten me, all of those things. And I read a lot of poetry, much more than I did in the past. And of course, for me, my own creative dry spell was that the words did not come. And so I felt that poetry would help my words come. It took a while, but eventually it ended.
Was there any moment where you knew that, bingo, this is it? Did you have that?
It's not, yes, actually. Well, no, it's more, it was sort of a week in which I kind of felt, I like to say to my family and people I love, that the spirits have started calling me. So there's a feeling that I had that the spirit has started calling. And it's a feeling that makes me very happy, but also makes me very anxious. Because I'm thinking, the words are coming back, but what if they don't actually really come back? What if they dry up again? What if I write only one page and then it dries up? So it's joy and anxiety mixed together. And so it kind of happened over a few days, and then I really went into the writing, and I was obsessive. When I'm in my writing space, when I'm creating fiction, it's a magical, strange thing. I am absorbed in it. It's all I want to do. You know, I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed afraid that I'll wake up and it will be gone. So I go to bed thinking about my characters. I wake up thinking about them. I cannot wait to go back to them. That's what it's like for me when I'm writing.
Well, the characters are quite interesting, but Dream Count maybe can be quite a tough read. You explicitly address, issues about women's physical experience for women, childbirth, fibroids, even the dark sides of pornography and its effects on women, and even female genital mutilation. How was it important to directly address these issues in this manner? Because we don't get to hear or read about this in popular literature.
Yeah. I think it's really important to talk about the things that matter and to talk about them in literature in a very direct way, because I think only literature can do that for us. So I've heard from men, mostly men, who found certain sections very tough. Because I think it's something with which men are unfamiliar. Women are much more familiar with it for obvious reasons. Women experience these things. And I think when we talk about it in general, there's a kind of glossing over of the actual realities, the grittiness of it. And this is the thing I think literature can do. Literature can take us inside, and nothing else can. If you write in journalism about childbirth, I think in some ways you're constrained because you sort of have to hold back. I can imagine an editor saying, no, let's take this out because readers might find it readers might get squeamish. But in literature, you have room. And I just think that it's really surprising how little we read in literature of women's real experiences, And I find it fascinating because, we all came from a woman's body. But we know so little about women's bodies. Even many women know little about their own bodies, because often women's bodies are shrouded in shame. You really can't talk about. I remember as a child, the idea of periods was something you were supposed to be ashamed of. And the older I got, I started to question, why should I be ashamed of something that naturally occurs in my body? Something, by the way, that the human race requires in order not to go extinct, right? I mean, periods happen because women ovulate, and without ovulation, pregnancy cannot happen. And so really for me, I wanted to write about women's lives in a way that is true, right? It's really true, is honest, is direct, might not make us comfortable, but I think it's good for us. We should know these things. We should normalize them, because by normalizing them, there's the possibility of removing the shame. And that I think is worth it.
Really worth it indeed. Quite a good read. Well, Chimamanda, I have to ask you this question. When it comes to the publishing sector for you're a writer, there's this thing about, or this concept or issue about African stories that sell internationally. You even referenced it with Chiamaka, who's also a writer, a character in the book, with the struggles of how to get her book, her material, published by Western publishers. What needs to change? Your experience in this, what needs to change in the literary scene for better representation of stories?
What needs to change? I think a part of me is actually reluctant to talk about that because I don't want to spoil market for any African writer. By which I mean, I think there are different kinds of African stories, obviously, we know that. But I also think that, to generalize, the Western publishing space is much more drawn to stories that fit certain stereotypes of Africa. Stories of suffering, stories of poverty, stories of conflict, right? And I think those stories are important. But it worries me that often they become the only things that people know about Africa. So that when you write other stories, middle-class stories, stories of not so much conflicts like war, but more interpersonal conflict, the kind of more, conflicts of hope and love and despair, that kind of thing. It surprises certain Western gatekeepers in publishing. So that's what I wish would change, that the gatekeepers of publishing really should have a much wider idea of what Africa is, because they do that for other parts of the world, right? I mean, or for their parts of the world. So I think if an American, I'm going to use America because America is the biggest market. If an American writer wrote about guns, that's, okay. If an American writer wrote about something very peaceful and quiet, that's also okay. But when it comes to Africa, somehow, I've been told by quite a few people that my novels surprise them. They surprise them because my characters are middle class. They surprise them with this book, Dream Count. A woman she's not in but she's in publishing, but she's not my publisher. She said to me, "Oh, how refreshing," but trust me, she didn't really mean it in a nice way. How refreshing it was to read about wealthy Africans.
Oh.
So, even the idea of African wealth in the Western space is often, people often talk about wealthy Africans as though somehow all kinds of African wealth has corruption behind it. As though there are not African business people who actually have worked hard for their money. The idea is always African wealth is somehow tainted. It's somehow corrupt. Because that's really the only story out there. When you hear about African wealth, you're hearing about a corrupt politician in general. And so these other stories that I think are so important to just balance our stories. You cannot understand us if all you think about is our negatives. You just will not understand us. So, yeah, I think that should change.
Well, so for emerging African writers,
yes.
You've cracked it over 20 years since Purple Hibiscus, an accomplished writer. What would you say you need to see in terms of African writers' stories, in terms of genre, style, formats, content?
I don't like being prescriptive, and I'll tell you why. I'm very careful about using tools because I don't want those tools used on me. So I can tell you in my head, I know what I want to see. But I will not tell you because, I occupy the space where, the news will then be, Chimamanda says African writers should write ABC. Oh. And I want people to write, I think the only thing I would say, and this is true, is I really think people should write what is true to them. I think very often, and I say this as somebody who did that for a while, which is when I was starting out, I read the books that were being published in the US, and I thought I should write a version of that because I felt this is the thing that they're publishing. And so I wrote that. My first novel, which was never published, thank God, was very false because I was copying what I saw in the bookstores, right, until I stopped and then I went and wrote the book that felt true to me, which was Purple Hibiscus. And so I think, if anything, I would say to young African writers, if the story calling you feels to you like nobody will understand it, it's too, maybe it's too local, write it. Write it.
All right. I need to ask this one because reading Dream Counts, it centers on women's voices, experiences. The characters there are women. But there's also the layered characters with the men that come and go in their lives.
Yes.
There's talk about the relational dynamics, power dynamics at play between men and women. What do your male readers tell you about Dream Count? And what do you think would be the big takeaway for your male readers of Dream Count?
Okay,
that's interesting. Because you've got male readers too.
Yeah. And I love my male readers, I have to say. I think, what have they said? Some of them have complained. They said that the men are not very appealing. And I'm like, I don't understand. They're appealing to me. But more seriously, I think I think Dream Count is a book about women, but I don't think it's a book only for women. I think it's a book for men and women. And if there is anything, it's that I want men to be more familiar with women's stories. I think it's important. We know from studies that women read books by men and women, and men read books by men in general. And I think that needs to change. I think if it changes, things might change in the way that men and women communicate with each other. I think in general, men are just not familiar with women's stories, which is why, and I think I write about that in the book as well, which is why often men are surprised by things about women's lives that to women are ordinary. So I hope men read this. I hope it opens their eyes just a little bit. I hope it makes them more familiar with women's stories, and I hope ultimately makes them more willing to think about women in a more complex way, right? In a more holistic way, and hopefully maybe in a less judgmental way. That's the hope.
Well, I have to ask you this, you're back home, Nigeria. You've spoken a lot about leadership in some of your recent interviews, and even in this book, we see some of that between setting. It's set in America, Nigeria, and even Guinea, both of which, of those three cities or three countries, West African countries, Kadiatu is from Guinea, West Africa. We don't really hear much of that, but you managed to highlight some ethnic, socio-political consciousness at play, in that country. We know that this is a region in terms of its pre-colonial and post-colonial differences and the influence we've had in our region. ECOWAS just had the 50th anniversary of West Africa. Guinea has its own political issues with, coups and military juntas in the region, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, and the rest, leaving the bloc. Where do you think your thoughts about Nigeria and West Africa are placed in respective to the continent and the world? What is our region?
I can tell you what I think our place should be. What our place is now is, I think, quite shameful. We should be, and I don't say this, there's a natural arrogance we have as Nigerians. And what I'm saying is not coming from that, even though I have a healthy amount of that. But it's coming from just being objective. We are the most populous country in Africa. We have a history in which we have been active in African politics. I'm very proud of Nigeria's support for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, for example. And so we should be in a better leadership position than we are in now, I think. I think Nigeria should be a source of inspiration for other countries in Africa. We're really not politically. I think culturally we are. I think other countries look up to Nigeria's cultural production, our music, our fashion, all of our literature. But politically, not really. And that's a shame, because I think we have everything it takes to be a kind of beacon for other African countries. In West Africa, by the way, I heard that the ECOWAS meeting started like 6 hours late. But anyway, in Abuja, somebody was just telling me. And it's a small point, but it made me think about, this says a lot about why we're not where we should be. I mean, the small things matter. If you're going to have a meeting, you should start on time. But I'm interested in, I call myself a Pan-African. I'm interested in this continent. I love this continent. West Africa is particularly special for obvious reasons. I'm West African. And writing about Guinea, for me, was also quite eye-opening, because it made me realize how little I knew about not just Guinea, but particularly the Francophone West African countries. I think that language barrier is unfortunate. But it was also very eye-opening for me just reading Guinean history, which, I kind of knew little bits about, but I was fascinated by it. But also it struck me how all of us have certain similar issues. We all have ethnic issues that have not been managed well. We have ethnic differences that have been politicized in the most negative ways. And in the end, it takes me back to leadership. Leadership makes all the difference. With the right leader, we do not have to have the problems that we have, or they do not have to be as bad as they are, especially the ethnic problems. You can bring people together. You really can bring people. You can make people feel included. You can. In the end, a nation is an idea. And it feels to me that we haven't quite, none of us in Africa have quite, well, sub-Saharan Africa, I can't speak for North Africa. We've not quite understood what it means to create a nation that's an idea. We haven't.
And as someone who's taking on some of these issues, whether from Nigeria, a bit of political history, you think that, but there's a way out? Because with fiction, with things fall apart, now with Purple Hibiscus and other writers, even you, maybe there's a way.
I'm an optimist. I think there is a way out. There can be, if we choose wisely, yes. Nigeria is full. There's so many people in this country today that can lead Nigeria in a much better way than we've been led. But they don't often have the opportunity to get to those positions, right? So, yes, I think I'm optimistic. I have to be. We don't have any other choice. But I really am optimistic also for just more objective reasons. I think that we now have a generation of young people who are a lot more politically aware, politically sophisticated, who are very clear about wanting better leadership, that's a good sign. And I think it's not just Nigeria, it cuts across the continent, and that's a good sign.
Well, what would you want Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's legacy to be?
I think it's actually men who spend their time thinking about legacy. I don't. I'm thinking about the next book I want to write. I want my legacy to be a person who loved fiercely. That's all I want my legacy to be. And by the way, when we die, we don't know what happens, so why should I care what my legacy is? I don't know where I'll be. I might not know. But no, really, seriously, I'm 47 and 3/4. And I am really not thinking about my legacy. I'm thinking about the walk ahead. I'm thinking about the books I have not written that I want to write. But more personally, I want to be remembered as a person who loved the people she loved and the places she loved very fiercely.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, thank you for speaking to us on DW.
Thank you very much.